Hello and welcome to CDA TV. I'm Daryl Jackson, and for the next hour we've got a very interesting topics to talk about. So we'll be talking about deaf representation in TVs and films and theatre. But just before we start, I would like to show my respects to the Queen and the royal family from all of us at CDA, as sadly Prince Philip has passed away this morning. He really was a wonderful man, and he served the UK and the whole world. And he was a coder, in fact, and he lived a wonderful life, so our condolences to them. So, talking about the deaf representation that we'll talk about today, we've got some special guests, and I will go on to introduce them. But first, I wanted to watch all the audience if they would like to join, so I can let you know if you want to ask any questions. You can put them in the comment, and there will also be 3 questions for you, so you can download them and answer them either using your phone and scanning a QR code, which you can see here. Oh, we'll have to wait for it. So when the QR code appears, you can use your phone, take a picture of it, or on your laptop. So there it is, so you can look at the 3 questions there and you can send in your answers. So you can do that throughout the show today, and maybe you can think about what sort of answers you'd like to submit. And also you can be involved through Zoom as well if you like, and the link is in the comments. So you can click on the link there and join through Zoom. So now I'd like to move on and introduce the 3 guests. So first we have Stephen. Second we have Alim. And third we have Jean St Clair. So welcome to all of you. Hello. Hello, Daryl, how are you? Oh, I'm fantastic. It's lovely to see you all here. Oh, it's brilliant to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us. Oh, and where's Jean? Oh, Jean's here. She's with us on Zoom. So hello, Jean. Oh, here I am. Oh, how are you, Jean? I'm very well, thank you. Oh, thank you so much for joining us, Jean. Hopefully it'll be a really interesting discussion. And it's lovely to see you all here. I feel like very warm, we can all be together again. So, exciting topic today. Jean, are you ready for the discussion? So, remember, from the audience at home, you can download the 3 questions that we'll be talking about. The main topic being about deaf representation in films and TVs. So I'd like to put the question to our guests today, to Jean, Alim or Stephen. Do you have any thoughts? Who would like to talk first? So the question about deaf representation in film, TVs and theatre, is there enough of it? I think really there's more sort of theatrical events popping up around the UK, but on film and TV I feel that there's still a very, very small amount in comparison to the hearing community. But it's a really interesting comparison that there's so much more in theatre than there is on sort of TV and films, but that's sort of my view on the community at the moment. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, recently I saw some statistics pop up, and they were talking about the background that about 5.2%, I think it was, that were sort of on camera. and that's in comparison to, the whole of the UK, which is 20%. I mean, I don't know what that statistic is for deaf people, but I definitely think there needs to be some improvement in the future. Oh yeah, I'd just like to add to that actually that, when we're talking about deaf people, we are talking about people using sign language or, speaking, and also when hearing people are acting as deaf people. So I think the representation currently is like very, very, very small. I mean, it must be, 0.01%. I don't know the exact figure, but something like that. But it would be really interesting to know for definite how few people are, if we had a percentage of the UK of how many disabled actors or deaf actors. I think there's still a big question mark over that. So that's a really interesting point. Should we move to Jean and ask what do you think, Jean? I think realistically, if you're comparing in the UK now to in the past, it has been a small improvement, but I think in America they still have, in mainstream TV, that they would have maybe a role that plays a deaf person, but it might be a hearing person playing that character. So I think there's been a little bit of improvement, but not a lot. Oh, that's a really interesting comparison, especially comparing the UK to American as well. Yeah, and I mean, in America, there's some shows or some films going on, and you do sort of see a few more maybe deaf or disabled characters, but I think definitely in the UK we have a strong leaning towards theatre for the deaf community. But if you look at the BBC and the big named companies, there just isn't that representation. And if you're talking about the whole of the UK, not just England, but Scotland and Wales and Ireland as well, there are, deaf actors popping up, and you've not heard of it, but they are branching out in the theatre community, definitely. So I think it's really interesting that there's such a big comparison between the theatre and the TV and films. And obviously there's sort of positives and negatives for both the media and the theatre productions. But I think at the moment, when you do see deaf people in films, it's quite a rarity really, but it would be lovely to sort of see more and more, because they're only sort of here and there at the moment. It's very interesting because obviously there is definitely an increase in deaf actors in the theatre, but I don't necessarily think that all the deaf community go to the theatre very regularly, because it's really hard to relate to that. And obviously in America they've made that big improvement of having more in films and more in TVs, but I still don't feel that it's enough. So Jean, how do you feel about that? It's interesting. It's very true. I mean, in America there's lots more deaf actors coming up, but they would still maybe hire a hearing actor to play a deaf part. So I think maybe here maybe that wouldn't happen, but in America it's still happening. So even very, very recently there was a new film where a hearing actor was playing a deaf role, and to me that it feels a bit different, because in the UK I don't think we'd accept that. Oh no, that's a really good point, Jean, thank you. And obviously you've got years of experience in theatre. How many years have you been acting? Oh dear, I couldn't answer that. I started when I was 17 with the British theatre company for the deaf. So I'm 72 now, so you can work out how many years that is. So yeah, after that I changed to do professional acting. So do you feel that since your career has started, do you feel that the deaf representation has stayed the same or has been different? Oh, I definitely think since when I started, I've been reading this book, which is British Theatre of the Deaf, Oh, is that an American book? No, that's a British, written by a deaf actor called Ian Stewart. And he used to be in the British theatre back then, and that was 1963. And he had contact with Radar and a few other peoples back then. And then until now, he's been in lots of different shows, and he's supporting deaf children, and some mainstream children watch the sort of shows as well. So I think definitely since then there have been ups and downs, but it feels like sometimes you're going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's not really a continuous improvement. But there's definitely a difference in deaf theatre productions and deaf theatre actors in the theatre. I think when I started it wasn't very common, but now that's definitely improved. Oh, that's really interesting to know that there's been so many ups and downs. And I think it's kind of useful to encourage that. And what about, graduating? Do you think you have to have that experience and the certificate to act, or do you think that people could go in for it? I think it's really interesting because I think, for lots of years, jobs are a bit up and down and people get distracted and have different interests at different points in their life. But I think since lockdown as well, since COVID started, people are really keen to move on and get going with different things. So I think there's definitely been a small improvement since then. But also there have been a few deaf people on TV that are speaking, and they've sort of focused more on that than they do on the sign language, because that's easier for them to broadcast to a hearing audience. And obviously the hearing audience who want to listen to the speech, not the sign language. So what do you think, Stephen? I can definitely see the benefits of getting a hearing person in to be the actors. And maybe they're more keen to apply for the TV as well. But I think it would be really much better to broaden the focus, so that we get more sort of sign language users and then deaf people that speak, so that you've got a more fair representation of the deaf community by broadening that. So in that way you can represent all sorts of deaf people, the people who are full BSL users or who use speech, and oral deaf users. And it might be that in the theatre companies that they get a lot of that sort of mixing with hearing people or other disabled people, that they get that mixture. But that's definitely more in the theatres than it is, because they have different events, and I feel that that's much more open, and I think there's a lot more demand. But on TV there might be like an interpreter in set, but there's definitely fewer deaf characters on TV, I feel. And I think on things like See Here and on BSL BT, they're sort of, the sign language actors are restricted to those sort of channels. And sometimes there's not enough deaf people that use speech, or there's not enough people that use sign language. And I think there's a debate for various different views, really. Obviously if you're deaf and you're an actor that speaks, then that's fine and you can follow that journey. But if you were deaf and you use sign language, then I think you should be given that opportunity to follow that route. I don't think you should feel like you have to sign because you're deaf, or you have to speak. And I feel like if other people were to sort of force us to speak, maybe that wouldn't be right for the other people's decision to be followed. So I think really we need representation of both, but it should be up to the actor. That's a really good response. So let's have a look at the audience and see what they've answered. Oh, that's very interesting. So, as you can see here, everybody's responded no, they don't feel there's enough representation. So really, from us here, that's not that surprising. So, in terms of getting that deaf representation out there and educating the mainstream media into improving that, how do you think we can reach them and get that awareness there? How can it be done? Has anyone got any suggestions? Jean, have you? Can you see me? Oh, here I am. Yeah, it's a good point. It's like what Stephen was saying about, I think a long time ago in theatres and TV, you know, people had to speak the Queen's English. It had to be very proper. But over the years, things have changed and you mix with lots of different cultures and speech has changed a lot on TV. And I think people are more accepting of all different people, that you may not have to speak the Queen's English. And I think now people are becoming much more accepting of, for example, deaf voices. And it might have been that a long time ago people were very wary about deaf people using their voice and they would be told not to. So, for example, I've worked lots of different voices, lots of different jobs, and my voice isn't always that clear to me, but it depends on the person. So sometimes if I knew the job or I knew the assessment, if I was being auditioned, sometimes I'd use my voice and sometimes I wouldn't, but really it was up to me and I'd use it whether it matched the role or not. But I think over the years people have been more accepting of using your deaf voice, which is good. And I understand, obviously, some deaf people may be recruited, they might speak very, very well, and some people might use sign language. But I definitely think there's been more acceptance of using deaf voices. Oh, that's a really interesting point. So I'd just like to add to that, actually. A long time ago, I was sort of joined the TV and the media experience, and I've worked with all of you. I've been lucky enough, and I did do some teaching as well. And all over the UK, we had about 50 directors, and we were teaching people how to work with deaf actors. So because I'd asked them all the question, what is your first thought when you're working with deaf people? What is your first thought? I'd like you all to write it down and hold on to it. Then we did the teaching session, the workshop, and throughout that, at the end, I asked them the same question again and they wrote it down and they could compare. But most people had written down fear. They don't know how to engage or connect with deaf actors. And then at the end of the training, they'd realise, actually, it's really simple. Oh, it's really easy to work with deaf actors. So at the end, all their answers has changed and it made them much more comfortable working with deaf actors. So I think a lot of that might be linked to education. What do you think? Yes, I agree. That's really interesting. And I think as well, really advocating for get a union and some sort of guidelines, similar to like a BSL Act as well, because it's all well and good people sort of complaining about it or wanting to fight for it, but knowing who to get that through to and knowing how to make that change is the really important thing. Because at the moment you might have that gut feeling that nothing's right, but you're not really sure how you can make that change effective, because there's nothing there that you can use to show people. But it'd be really useful, things like how to use interpreters, how to work with deaf people. So I think as well it's really important that people understand that, you know, deaf people, there's a broad variety of deaf people. It could be that people are profoundly deaf and they're full sign language users, or it might be that they're hard of hearing and use speech. So I think it's really important that people consider all different aspects of being deaf. Yeah, and I think when you're talking about representation, you know, when you're watching theatre or TV and you notice a deaf person, you celebrate that, that's brilliant. But I think definitely when you see people you should be supporting them to become the main actor, because usually they are supporting characters. And it might be about the deaf person feeling low or having their struggle and then making having that success, for example, on films or on TV. And, it's usually about these people who are amazed that other people can communicate with them and that they've gone through all these struggles and that people have made the attempt. But, for example, the sound of metal and in EastEnders, where they've got a deaf character coming in, they're usually the supporting character. So they're not the main character, and they'll be there for a while, and then they'll be discontinued. And people just tend to forget about it. So I think it's really important as well, because they sort of become these like 2D characters that are there as a tokenistic thing. But in theatre, it's much better because you're there throughout the whole production. And so, for example, that you follow them through the whole journey and you get to see different perspectives and different successes as well. But on TV and film, it's always very disheartening. The same thing happens. Either they're stupid or they're struggling and communications is difficult. It's never like a positive journey through someone's life, having family problems and arguments and discussions or things like that. Like normal everyday life for deaf people is very rare to see on TV. It's usually that the person needs support. So I think that representation is really, really supportive here in the UK as well. And it's the same as having, there's a lot of white deaf people as well on, a bit of TV or theatre. But again, having more representation of other communities and other cultures, you still need that because, again, they might be deaf and still not have that representation of their race. So I think there's big changes that need to be made in a lot of different areas when you're talking about representation. Well, that's really fascinating, Stephen. I just wanted to add one more question to that, because obviously we've got 3 questions to do today. So the third question is, Jean, have you got anything to add?
Yes, when we're talking about education being the forefront of how people are getting the knowledge of bringing in deaf actors, I think you need to get directors together as well and create workshops. And when you go for auditions, for example, you might want to say, okay, so that role for the audition, you have to be visual. And I think the other option is to go in there with an interpreter. But with the interpreter, you have to make sure that their voiceover is appropriate and meets the right contexts. It could be a poor voiceover which could cause you the job. But I think when I've been for jobs like that, it's been proven that the interpreter's level has to be of a high level, because actually I'm relying on that interpreter to be my voice. So right at the beginning of the audition, if it's for TV, film, theatre, I think that the training has to start from how you're going to audition. Yes, I agree there needs to be a match for the voice with the interpreter, but we're going to quickly move on to the next question. Sorry, Jean. The next question is, if there is a deaf character, but they bring in a hearing actor, how do you feel about that as a deaf person? Should hearing people take deaf roles? We've heard some of the views of the people in the studio, but what I'd like to do now is introduce the audience. So let's say hello to who we've got with us today. I can see 2 people there. Who can we see? There's Adrian. Hello, Adrian. How are you? I can tap the top of your head from where I'm sat. Are you well? Yes, hi, me. Okay, you're talking to me. Yes, I'm very well, thank you. How are you? Yes, I'm good, thank you. Um, I'm very excited to be here. Okay, I'm very well, thank you. I'm really enjoying this discussion. It's lovely to bring this all together. Well done to everybody who's involved in bringing it together. Did you have a question or any views that you'd like to share with us here today, Adrian? I've pulled you a bit into the spotlight, haven't I? Yeah, what I'd like to add to the discussion, um, I just want to add my views of something that I've been thinking about in relation to the first question. I was really shocked to hear you talking about deaf actors and deaf characters being linked with each other, and that can happen in situations that are empowering for deaf people. Yes, I see that. And when you have something that is specifically designed for the deaf community, then that can work. So, for example, the TV program Queer as Folk, that was a really fantastic way to represent the LGBT and gay men's community. And so I think that was set up for that particular community to show and represent that community. But I feel like Stephen said, we as deaf people are not getting that representation. Yes, deaf people can speak. Yes, deaf people can sign. There are different ways of communicating with deaf people and for deaf people to communicate. And it's important to show those variations in ways that we communicate with each other as well as with the hearing community. And so through story, through the power of story, we can bring that representation to life. That's really lovely. Do you have a response to that, anybody? Jean, anybody? Alim, yes, I absolutely agree with what you've just said. I would love to see a programme like Queer as Folk that is for the representation of deaf people, absolutely. We all know that there has been huge discrimination against the LGBT community, and lots of minority groups have also faced similar discrimination. And deaf and disabled people are being discriminated against continually. I think we're seen as second-rate citizens, and I think that is something that has continued for a long time. I think a lot of people now are more accepting of the LGBT community, but still not of the deaf community. I think it's still seen as poor parents, they've got a deaf child, and I think it's also seen from the medical point of view of, I'm really sorry but your child is deaf. You wouldn't ever say, I'm really sorry but your child has been born gay. I think there has to be a culture shift. But to go back to what we were saying before, I think it needs to be a visual representation. It needs to be there. We need to see it more often, and it needs to become more mainstream, because most hearing people, have they met a deaf person? I think you'll find actually mostly they haven't, and that's because there isn't enough representation. Jean, is there anything you'd like to add to that? Yeah, I'd really like to add something to the view of, I'm really sorry your child is deaf. I know from when I was growing up, the attitude towards me and the bullying towards me on the street or on the bus, I had people imitating my signing, with silly hand gestures, with interpreters on TV, and with actors as well. It's still not there. There has been a little bit more of that sort of thought of this is normal, compared to what it was like. I think previously deaf people were thought of as stupid, as ignorant, and it's not like that now. Our language is seen as much more beautiful, so there has been a shift. There has. Stephen, what would you like to say? Well, here in the UK, we have, luckily, See Here. We've got different theatre groups that have been going for several years, And then you've got BSL-BT, which I think was set up about 6 years ago. We've got all these different formats of bringing deaf empowerment to the forefront and encouraging people to tell their stories, to talk about their lives. But I think with BSL-BT, for example, when they set up, it was lovely at the beginning. But I think what we've seen actually is that there isn't the full representation of deaf people. We're not in the mainstream enough. And so what I would like to see is more opportunities to sort of say, why don't you show people what you can do? And I think it will depend on Channel 4 at the moment. They're talking about HIV and AIDS, and all the actors themselves are within the LGBT community. And so I think they're not getting actors to play gay actors or trans actors. They're getting people from the community already as like a grassroots type of organisation and type of programme. And so this kind of series is something that people are talking about in the mainstream, and I wish that we had something like that, that BSL-BT could help us set up something like that, because there just isn't enough and the struggle is still there. And I think what the issue is that there isn't that deaf programme, and there isn't that regular series, like for example EastEnders. There have been the odd deaf character here, there and everywhere, but it's just not enough, is it? Okay, so let's think about Hollywood. They're wanting somehow to raise the money. That's all they're all about, is getting someone who is glamorous for my film, someone from the Hollywood world. And, you know, why would they get someone who is deaf when they can get someone who's already well known? You know? How would we get around that issue? This is such an easy issue to solve, and I've said it so many times. The person who's leading it needs to give somebody a chance. The only reason people become famous is because they were given a chance in the first place. And I understand that tickets need to be sold, and why would you give the deaf person a leading role? But what I would say to that is, if you don't give a deaf person a leading role, you can bring in other people to support that deaf leading role. So, say for example, I've seen people campaigning for it, but the representation of and the shock of that skill is because they've been given a chance. People are actually seeing it for once. I personally would like to have Brad Pitt supporting me, I have to say. What do you want to say to that, Stephen? Yeah, I agree with Alim that giving people the chance is the most important thing, because we have the skills, we have the abilities. There are so many actors out there in the mainstream that are just not recognised, and it's because they're not involved in enough. I think when you see someone signing, you just kind of, you put it to one side, don't you? It's so much easier to ignore someone who's signing rather than to bring them to the forefront to show their acting skills. So would you go for a famous actor? I don't know. I think, in honesty, if you're looking at selling the tickets, then your heart's not in the project anyway. With it being a business, I get that. I get that it is about making money. But if we think about the film A Quiet Place, there was a young deaf actress in there, and she was equal to the parents who were hearing actors. And then in Godzilla, the film with King Kong as well, there was a young actress. I think it was Kaylee Hotter. and she's there out in the mainstream. She is being a leading actress. You can see that she's got the skills because she's been given the chance. And the more that you give people the chance, the more popular they're going to become. I mean, I'm thinking of how many actors that I've met in my experience that have got that kind of platform, and there's not a lot because they're just being ignored. So how do you know that somebody has the skill for that platform if you don't give them a chance? We have to keep fighting. This is what we have to do. We have to work hard to show that the platform is there. That's a really good a really good answer, actually. Thank you, Stephen, to show that there is a platform there. I want to hold that for later. Is there anyone to introduce? Jean, is that something you'd like to add to that before we go to the audience? Yes, I absolutely agree with Alim over deaf people being ignored because Brad Pitt's available. You know, there's just no fairness in that at all. And I think what makes it worse is that those deaf actors accept the background roles. So say, for example, I'm thinking Jamil from A Good Place, Jamila Jamil. She's had hearing problems in the past, but she was offered a deaf role and she disagreed with it. She said, no, I think it should be given to a deaf person. So because she turned down the role, that made way for a deaf actor. And I think that's what more hearing actors should do. They should know in their gut that it's wrong to take the place of someone who is a native sign language user. I know someone who is deafened and they took a part, and I can sort of understand that, but really, if you've got somebody who is a BSL deaf user, then they should be brought to the forefront. I think if you are offering it to a hearing person, the hearing person has the obligation to say no. Please give it to a hearing person. Please give it to a deaf person. Is there anybody who wants to put their hand up in the audience who would like to get involved in this conversation? Anybody? Can you put your hand up if you're interested in getting involved in this conversation? I can only see 3 people watching at the moment. Can you put your hand up? Oh, we've got Rinku. Hi. Hi, Rinku. Hello, how are you? I think there might be a slight time lag. I think that's why. Yes, there is a bit of a time lag. What would you like to say, Rinku? Yeah, no, it's just a little time lag there. I think we're just waiting for Rinku, who's frozen. Oh, that seems to be better. Okay, I hope I'm not going slightly off topic, but something's just popped into my head that I'm thinking of. I know that if a person is interested in getting involved in acting, and I'm not criticising here, I think deaf people should be involved in acting, but I think there's often not the opportunity, and because of the lack of opportunities, the deaf person becomes used to being turned down, or they feel that they are favoured. There are favourite actors out there who would be preferred. So I'm just kind of thinking, okay, so does that mean that I have to take part in hearing companies because I'm being turned down through favouritism? I think that can be an issue. So I kind of feel like sometimes I have to look at it from a different point of view and be the devil's advocate slightly. What are your thoughts on this? Do you have a response, Stephen? Yes, I do. So you're talking about people who are used regularly again and again and again. So favouritism, as it were. Is that what you mean? Well, there's one organisation I'm talking about who have film and theatre productions, but I always see the same actors used. But of course, you know, that person has worked hard and they're seen as the best. But I'm thinking, hang on a second, why are we not given the chance? Maybe it's because of my race, maybe it's because of my culture. I don't know. We have a slight issue with Frozen here. But yes, I think if you're going to go to America, they're sort of more empowered for deaf people. What do you think to that? I know some British actors, talking about hearing actors more than deaf actors, are seen as ones that are going to be more successful in America, and so therefore are given more opportunities. And racially, that can be an issue. Say, for example, a black actor is wanting to get roles over in America, but they're feeling like there's some kind of favoritism towards specific ethnics. What we need to have is a match for, say, for example, you got the role. We see a lot Martin Short with Robert De Niro, or we see Johnny Depp with another famous person, just because they have that relationship and that's the favourite person. And so the opportunities are few and far between. And so the barriers are going to be continuous. And there needs to be a wider range of opportunities. And we need to break down that favouritism to make it more equal. What do you think, Alim? Yeah, I agree. Just to talk about the UK, though, favouritism does exist. When you're talking about favouritism of Asian actors, for example, I see the same Asian actor again and again and again. But that doesn't mean that it's right. It just happens. It's something that we have to put up with and almost accept. But what you were talking about was that deaf opportunities are limited. But Jean was saying that it's the responsibility of the hearing actor to turn down roles, because otherwise it's going to continue to provide less opportunities for deaf people. And it's like white people need to turn down opportunities to play Asian roles. My dream for the future is that it just won't matter anymore. We'll all share our roles. We won't feel like we haven't been given the opportunity, because we will have been. The opportunities will be there already. But because they're not at the moment, it does feel like it's very cut off. Jean, would you like to add to that? And then we'll go back to the audience. Yeah, I'm just thinking about the lack of mixing. You're right, but it's really difficult, because at the same time, hearing people have also got barriers. It's not just deaf people. You can't give somebody something on a plate. That's not how it works. You have to work hard. They have to be a special type of person. Say, for example, on TV, you've got a father and son combination. They have to match. They have to look similar, and they have to have the same level of skill as well. And that is really a tough business. It is a tough business. It's a tough industry as a whole. And we just have to keep trying to open up the doors and provide opportunities for people. Rinku as well was talking about favouritism and the level of skill. Do you think that that is important, that favouritism is there because of a level of skill? Well, I feel slightly unjust, because any minority group, it's seen that they are given a job just because they are a minority, which I absolutely disagree with. The education has to be there, because sometimes it isn't, and it shows. What you really need to do is give opportunities to people and give education to people as well to solve this problem. Oh, Stephen wanted to say something. Sorry, I interrupted. Yeah, you were right. Offering training can be a barrier. It can be difficult. But I think there needs to be awareness of it, that if their skills are ignored, that, social media actually has gone nuts over the last lockdown period, hasn't it? People are seeing more skills out there via social media. But what we don't want to become is, lots and lots and lots of famous deaf people who don't have the skills. We need those who have got skills, high level of skills, that are there, who are around and about, and build on those skills and build them up to offer more and more opportunities. Whereas if we're just kind of offering someone something because of what they look like or because of their disability, that's not helping the skill set. That's actually causing more of a problem, because the skills can be trained to improve, which means that opportunities can be improved as well. What does the audience have to say about this? If you could put your hand up and then we'll go to you. Please put your hand up if you want to say something. Anyone in the audience? Is there anything you'd like to say? Yes, hi. I have a question. I think I might be frozen. There's a time lag, so don't worry about it. We can still see you. Okay, that's fine. What I wanted to say was in relation to what Stephen was saying about deafness not just being signing or speaking with a deaf voice, but there are other ways that deaf people need to communicate. And in the UK, the deaf community that I know has, its own little minority groups within it, the Black, Asian, all different ethnic minorities as well. But where is their story? They are not being represented. Yeah, I think we've frozen. Hang on just 1 second, please. We had a little bit of freezing. It was a bit funny. But yeah, if you could just go back and repeat yourself a little bit. Yes, I will do. So we have our community. There is a high percentage of deaf Asian people. So my question is, where is that representation? Where are their stories? It's something that I've not seen for a long time. I feel like the wall has been completely closed around the deaf Asian community. I kind of feel like they're seen as separate to deaf people. And so I would like to know a bit more about that. I think it depends on who is writing, who is directing the programme, and who is making the programme. They're usually all white people, and so ethnic minorities aren't seen as communicating their roles, their stories, because the stories aren't being told from the very bottom level of creating a programme. I think what we need to do really is go to the companies, the theatre companies, TV, film companies, deaf and hearing, BSLBT, See Here, for example, and say, in all honesty, you are offering this service, but it's not equal, because most of the people who are in the production are white people, and it's not fair. And so I agree, we need to have more writers and producers from the very beginning of the ethnic minorities, because at the moment there's just not that representation. The Western view, the white view as it were, is that we can understand ourselves, but actually what we need to do is understand others. Alan, what did you want to say to that? It's not just a problem in the deaf community, it's more widespread than that. It's within the hearing community as well. I think it was 2018 that the Stage newspaper set up looking for they did a poll to see the difference between white, black and Asian writers, and they had 2% South Asian. East Asian was 0 point something percent representation. So yeah, Asian representation was absolutely the worst. So their stories are not being told, they are not being represented, and that's something that we need to move forward with. So yes, it is in the deaf community, but it's double discrimination, I think. I absolutely agree. Are you happy with that answer? Are you happy for us to move on? Yeah, I'm really hoping that there will be an improvement after lockdown and more deaf representation as well as ethnic minority representation. Let's have a look at the results of the poll, shall we? Wow, there we go. That's interesting, isn't it? A lot more people say no, that hearing people should not be allowed to play deaf roles. There's 6.7% that say it's okay. I think it's 8.6. I can't quite see it, but yes, we can see quite clearly from the colours what the representation is. If you have a coda, what's your response to that, Alim? To have a coda who is acting a deaf role? So you mean, as coda, you mean someone whose parents are deaf? Oh, what's that film called? There was a deaf role. Yeah, The Sound of Metal, that's the one. Well, a lot of coders say this is my language, this is my community, this is my culture. But actually what you have to do is think about the representation. Yes, you do have the culture, you do have the identity and everything, but actually it is your responsibility, the same as hearing actors, to say no. We need to give it to a deaf person. Maybe in the future, you know, we might have a coder in there, but it might be a deaf coder. I think we have to think about that, don't we? What we said earlier, like Jean said, people have to learn to say no. What do you think, Jean, if we had a coder taking on a deaf role? Like with that film, The Sound of Metal, there was a coder who took the role of a deaf person, and I feel like that person should know better. That's what I would say to them. You have stripped the role from a deaf person, and you are worse for representing a deaf person because you've taken that opportunity from a deaf person. And as a coder, you should understand that more than a hearing person who isn't a coder. The role is for a deaf person, so hearing people shouldn't even be considered, and that needs to be a change in the schema as well. And coders should know that, because then a deaf person is missing out, and that's incredibly sad. I'm trying to think, if it was me, if I was hearing, like, would I accept the role? I think often people don't think about the consequences, about the negative image that it would make for me. You know, do I think about the money, or do I think about the stardom or the opportunity? I think, yeah, some people would take that opportunity without thinking of the consequences. What do you think? Is that something that you've seen before? Yeah, there has been a situation, well, it's quite difficult to talk about, but there was a company who wanted a BSL role, but they never specified that the person should be deaf or hearing. They just said anyone who knows BSL can apply. But I'm thinking, okay, so if you've got someone who can sign, a deaf person who can sign or a hearing person who can sign, what's the comparison? Who's more likely to get the job? And that is a problem, because you're focusing on the language, not anything else. You're not thinking of the thought process or the culture. and that can be quite difficult. It's in the advertising for the role as well. Okay, we haven't got that much time left, so what we're going to do is go back to the audience and ask anybody who's got their hands up if they have anything they'd like to say. Hello? Can you see us? I think you're frozen. Okay, let's go to the next person. Joe, we've got Joe here. Hello, Joe. Hi, how are you? I'm very well, thank you very much. We haven't got much time, but yeah, if you can quickly talk about your views. This discussion has been so interesting, and you discussed about disabilities and deafness. And actually, I'm wondering, is there an inequality even there between deaf people being given opportunities and disabled people being given opportunities? Yeah, that's a really interesting question. What are your thoughts on that? Jean, would you like to add your views on this matter? Do you want to respond to that? I don't know the statistics, but from my personal experience, having been to auditions for mainstream TV, the role doesn't specify deaf or disabled. It's kind of an open audition. What I have done is been to one with my interpreter and used more visual communication means. And I had people sort of, for silent witness, there was somebody called Liz Carr, who was a fantastic actor. But I'm just kind of wondering, you know, are they the right person? How can they get the right characteristics of a deaf person, you know? And there are those little differences, aren't there? That's very interesting. I'm afraid we don't have much time left, so what I'm going to ask is if Joe is happy with that question, that answer. I think what we're going to do is each of us have 1 minute to look at what the solution is to this problem in the future. How to bring deaf representation into the mainstream. Jean, can you give your 1 minute view on this? Yes. What I think is important is to start right at the beginning with writers, bringing people into the audition, for hearing people to say no, and understanding that no does mean no. Alim, what would you like to say? I agree with you, Jean. Yes, I think we need to start right at the forefront of the creating the ideas and get deaf people involved right at the beginning, to have deaf producers, deaf writers, deaf directors. There needs to be more in the teaching of deaf people to solve this problem and how they can be there from the forefront. Stephen, what's your thoughts? I think we need to stop moaning and saying what it is that we want to say. I think we need to get involved. We need to be the action rather than just keep moaning about it. I think we need to be in a position where we can influence change, because we know that we can influence through education, through young people's education, teaching them from a very young age that this is the future, because at the moment it's missing from today, and we have to hope that it isn't missing from the future, and to show a variety of deaf people in the mainstream. That's what we need. Action, not words. So we have results of who we think has the best solution. Let's have a look. Oh, it looks like Stephen. You're the winner. Oh, well done. Oh, this is lovely. Well done. Oh, Jean and Alim are catching up to me. Oh, no, I should have more. This isn't fair. Come on, more for me, please. So, Stephen, how do you feel? Oh, well, in all honesty, we all have shared our values. We all work together because the values are shared. So we're a team supporting each other. We are level. We know what the benefit is going to be. We know what the next step is going to be, and we're all going to work together to make sure that happens. I want to say a huge thank you to all of those in the audience, and it's a goodbye from me. Let's get a goodbye from the audience. Thank you everybody so much for joining us. I know we haven't had much time. It's been a real shame, but I've really valued your time. Thank you so much for watching. Big thank you to Jean. Well done. Thank you, Jean. Ow, don't hit my head. A huge thank you to those who are coming. I really miss them in the acting world. It's been wonderful having time with them again. Thank you to Stephen and Alim. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Oh, this has been lovely. If we have any more comments about how we can improve the service that we're providing, how we can continue to support each other, maybe we'll have some new deaf writers who've developed from today, or people who want to tell their stories of what life is like, or maybe even some budding actors. I know the future will be bright. I'm hopeful anyway. I have to stay hopeful. So I want to say thank you, big thank you for watching. It's time for us to stop now, but thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time. Goodbye.